Hello, everybody. I'm calling in from the Washington, D.C. area. I would love to know on the chat box, so feel free to get active there. I want to know, where are you calling in from and what is your background? If you're in medical school, what year of medical school are you in? And if you're already an attending clinician, I want to know that too. If you're coming from the veterinary side, please let me know. So please be active in the chat box and let's show some love. Okay, I see somebody from Chicago. I see somebody from Nepal. I see somebody from the US, from New Jersey, Maine, the UK. Awesome. Germany, Indonesia, holy moly, India, Russia. We got the world here today, which is wonderful. And I also want to know exactly where you are in your studies too. South Africa, Belgium, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. This is incredible. We got the Caribbean. Holy cow. This is really, really, really wonderful. Virginia, New Jersey, Maine, Michigan. We got several states from the United States here. Wonderful. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm very happy to be talking about One Health, because when we're talking to such a diverse audience, really what we have in common is One Health. First, let's go over what One Health is. And to give you a little bit of my background, I'm a veterinarian. And why would I, as a veterinarian, be speaking with WADM, the World Association for Disaster and Emergency Medicine? Well, you will find out in the next slide. Back in 2018, I was a part of the California Veterinary Medical Reserve Corps. And you may or may not remember, but back in 2018, at that time, it was the largest wildfire in California. Now, while there were people fleeing from their homes, there were also people running back to their homes to get their pets, to free their horses, to open the gates for their cows. And I was living about 300 kilometers or about 200 miles away from the source of the flames, Paradise, California. Now, I was called up to assist with the animal care in this natural disaster because it was, at that time, the largest that had ever existed in recorded history in California. The way it works for the Veterinary Medical Reserve Corps is that you start local, you get called in from the local area to go help with natural disasters. And then depending on the size of the emergency, it spans out. And as I said, I was 200 miles or about 300 kilometers away from the source of these flames. So after about a week and a half, I got called up as a volunteer and I was deployed, but the smoke was so thick. Where I was living, it was already causing problems for asthmatics. I did not trust my car's filter driving up there. You could see a bit of the haze while on my way. And this is not fog. This is smoke. And this is me about 45 minutes away from where I was stationed, where I was deployed to. This is no joke. Just half an hour later, it looks so dark that it looked like it was nighttime. It wasn't, it was smoke. This is where I ended up going, the Chico Airport. Just like many other smaller cities, it was a single terminal airport. Thanks to the kind donations of many people around the country, people donated animal food, animal carriers, and this was the main terminal. On this side, that's where administrative buildings were. On this side, there was a single large hangar. Those were all converted. The large hangar was converted to the dog area. It also had on the outside goats and ducks and chickens. And then on this area where the administrative offices were, and that was called the cat sector. And that's where I was placed as the head of the cat sector. In this main building is where the critical care patients were, mainly the really bad burn victims were. And this is inside of the dog sector. It was like an apartment complex. It was like a city within a single open room. Beyond this room was the hangar where you actually look up and you see an airplane. It's incredible. You do a physical exam, you're listening to the heart and the lungs, you work on the medication that's due, and then you look up and then you see an airplane. It is out of this world. And this is just an example of what you would be seeing. So why would a veterinarian be involved in taking care of disasters? Well, as I had said, there are people who rush back to their homes to save their pets. We can't go forward in disaster care and emergency medicine if we don't consider that human-animal bond. I remember just sharing one last story that there was this woman who was bald because she was undergoing chemotherapy, and she lived in a trailer, and she rushed back to her trailer to save her 2 rabbits and her parakeets. And she told me, this is why I'm still alive. I live for these animals. So think about that. When you see a patient, regardless of the species, it's not just the living organism in front of you. It's the environment, it's the story that comes with it. So what is One Health? One Health is teamwork between people who care for our health. So that's all of you human medical folks, the health of the environment. So ecologists, right? Animals, so the veterinarians and ecologists also play a role, and plants. So a sick environment can cause sick people. I break this down into even further for a better discussion. One Health can be a concept, which is that interconnection between our health and the health of the environment, animals, and plants. And the One Health approach is the teamwork. People of various backgrounds, disciplines, we come together and we solve complicated problems. So while I was working in the animal sector during this natural disaster, I was certainly working with firefighters and medics who were coming in, and they wanted to come and see the animals who they had rescued because they wanted to have some type of good story coming out of their efforts. It was really quite powerful. Now let's talk about another section of One Health. Remember, I said the One Health concept is that interconnection between our health and the health of the environment, animals, and plants, right? So you may or may not have heard of this, this term, zoonotic disease, but through One Health Lessons, an organization that I started that inspires everybody on the planet to care about One Health, all the students learn about what a zoonotic disease is. And some of these students are as young as 6 years old. So a disease that jumps between different species, particularly into and from humans. Now, there are several examples. Keep in mind, up to 75% of infectious and emerging diseases, the source is from animals. Now let's consider the thoughts, okay? The thoughts on the zoonotic origins of SARS-CoV-2, or the virus that's responsible for COVID-19. Well, in China, there were published studies that showed that there are coronaviruses in the area. Look at this date, March of 2019. And if you read in these studies, and even this one, human-animal interactions and bat coronavirus spillover potential. Spillover means coming from the animal population into human population among rural residents in southern China. If you looked at the map, you know where Wuhan is, southern China, right? So look at this date. Scientists knew that there are viruses of spillover potential coming from wildlife And there was a chance that it could affect people. Okay, so if you don't trust me, then look these up because they're freely accessible in biosafety and health. Okay, but the key thing that's really important to remember is that if we ever know the original origin, I would be surprised, honestly, of SARS-CoV-2. But we scientists have known for decades that there is potential of viruses, bacteria, other type of origins of diseases coming from nature and affecting people. And it really comes down to how we have impacted nature. So let's go into that a little bit. You may also have heard that, bats could be the ultimate reason for these coronaviruses. And certainly there are several families of coronaviruses. There are several segments of it, right? And bats certainly can carry coronaviruses, just like humans can carry coronaviruses, but we cannot get rid of the bats. They are pollinators. They are seed dispersers. They eat insects, right? They are incredibly important to keep the ecosystem alive and well and healthy. So here's an example of what we talk about with even 6-year-olds. We start off with One Health Lessons, going through a slide that has all of the animals just spread out beautifully. The trees are taking up the entire screen. And then something changes. The people are coming, the forest is getting smaller, and the animals are moving. Where are the animals going? Where would you go if your home was destroyed? You would have to find food and shelter somewhere, right? Or else you would perish. So we have created an environment that puts extra stress on these animals, right? Remember that statistic I said, up to 75% of infectious diseases, emerging infectious diseases, are related to animals. So when we have stressed animals in a condensed area that brings animal species that don't necessarily belong near each other, very close, and with stress, just like in humans, with stress, cortisol goes up, your immune system gets weakened, you start to show more signs of illness. You get to cough more or sneeze more, for instance. Well, wouldn't that be a wonderful breeding ground for a virus or any other pathogen to spread when there's a stressful situation? Okay. Now, if an animal doesn't want to stay in the forest, then they have to move out. And again, remember what I talked about, zoonotic diseases. Let's take this one step further. Because of the changes of the environment, because of climate, because of dirty water, because of deforestation, whatever the reason, a single bird leaves. Now, let's take it one step further. All of the birds leave. All of the winged birds leave. There are going to be a lot of consequences. Think about the food chain. Once the birds leave, there are going to be less trees because birds can act as seed dispersers and pollinators. Number two, there are going to be more mice because other types of birds eat mice. Well, when the mouse population goes up, well, then the coyote or the wolf population can go up because there's more food to prey on. And then now look at the situation. There are people surrounded by animals. And I'm sure in medical school, you learn about these diseases that can come from, say, rodents or things that are carried on rodents, such as plague, right? Yersinia pestis, coming from the fleas. And so much more, right? So what's the cause of all of this? It's how we treated the environment, right? So remember, bats are very, very important. If you get rid of bats in some areas, they're known as keystone species in some areas. That means that while you could be starting off with this, if you get rid of the bats, then you end up with this. Sure, people can stay around for as long as they possibly can because we try to make resources, we try to bring food in from other areas, but eventually the humans would have to move. So a keystone species is a species that if it leaves, the entire ecosystem collapses. So bats are incredibly important. Now let's talk about the public health response with COVID. And I've been saying this ever since the start. And it's played out. And this is the reason why we're having this discussion today, because we need to do better. We, as in the world, and people coming from the medical perspective, either human medicine or veterinary medicine or environmental health, right? There's a lack of public and child education. And why do I differentiate between public and child? In my experience, if children know about what vaccines are for, they very well could explain it to their parents one-on-one at home. If children knew that a mutation means change, a mutation can strengthen something, it can weaken something, or it could just change something, right? And just not change its strength. So take, for instance, this tomato. It looks really odd because there's a mutation, but does it taste the same? Well, it probably does. Is there more to the size of the tomato? Yeah, so maybe you could feed more families. But change and mutations are not anything to fear. Change and mutation is something to understand. So that way we can try to predict how to manage future mutations before they actually happen. And this is one of the things that I speak about in the book that I wrote that recently came out, called The Art of Science Communication. We could talk about that later. But in that book, it talks about not only talking to children about science, talking to the general public, including reporters, and talking to policymakers. And I'm more than happy to talk about how to speak with policymakers, the people who are the biggest influencers who can change really the future of the planet. But it's more of a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach at the same time. So this is yet another way I explain the virus, SARS-CoV-2, to children. Now, viruses are pretty simple structures. If you just think about it in like the barest bones, there's an outer shell and an inner core, right? Two parts. You don't need to go into more detail. The general public doesn't care about more detail. Okay, now let's go into this outer shell red and this inner shell core, this inner core being red comes out as a quote unquote normal virus. Now, if there was a change to the inner core, that would create a mutated virus. Okay, now go with me for this next step. A totally different virus, okay? Blue on blue would make a normal version of that virus, and blue on red would make a mutated version of this virus. Okay, now let's explore what each section of the virus is responsible for. The outside really handles how easy it is for that virus to enter into a cell. It's really how it's the infectious nature of it. The inside, so viruses have RNA or DNA on the inside. Depending on the age group that you're speaking with, it's not really that important. You don't bother talking about DNA and RNA to a 6-year-old, for instance, but a high schooler, they would appreciate the difference. Regardless, it's the inside here, this simple circle here, that's responsible for once the virus is inside of another cell, it can replicate a lot or a little. So let's take this example. If this was a normal virus for the red virus, and this was a mutation, well then if this mutated version creates the virus to be a lot more easily replicated, then this is going to be a more powerful virus. right? They can get into the cell at the same rate, but once they get into the cell, this is going to replicate a ton. Taking this into account, again, this is the normal virus, and this is the mutated version. Let's say if this is not replicating nearly as well as this, that means that this mutated version of the virus is going to be weaker than the original. And that's that type of mutation that weaken the virus, that can happen in nature. And that's what scientists think happened with SARS-CoV-1. If you might have been just born around that time, but in the late 90s, with Hong Kong, and it even happened in Canada, SARS-CoV-1, we think, as scientists, we think that it mutated out. It became weaker, and that was fantastic. The problem with SARS-CoV-2 is that it mutated and it got a little bit more complicated. But that's nature, right? That's nature. And so as medical professionals, regardless, again, of what species you are treating, you have to make sure that you explain medicine, that you explain science in a way that can be understood by the families that are caring for your patients and the patients themselves. So think of veterinarians like pediatricians, right? Our patients don't speak with us. The way we can help our patients is by communicating through their caregivers. So like a pediatrician's patient's parents, right? Okay, so how can we improve communication skills and leadership skills, even at the same time as learning how to practice medicine? Because we all know that is a lot of learning, right? Well, fortunately, at several schools, there are such things as touch hours to help gain, volunteering hours and credits. And this is how you can attain that through the Lesson Leaders program. So sure, while One Health Lessons educates children, we also educate university students and professionals. And the way we do that is we train and we improve the science communication skills of those university students and professionals. And the best way for them to improve their science communication skills is by communicating with children. Children are honest. They tell you when they don't understand something. They show you when they don't understand something. You have to get them to laugh, to play, to have fun. And so through this Lesson Leaders program, we teach you free of charge how to improve your science communication skills. It comes in a few steps. The first step is attend a 1-hour online training session. That's when you learn the difference between communicating with a 6-year-old versus a 16-year-old versus a 36-year-old, right? Very different approaches. Then you watch an entire One Health lesson on YouTube, and you take a quiz afterward. That quiz is based on pedagogy. So really, what was the teaching technique used here, right? We want you to have not only learn the material, of course, but we want you to analyze the teaching techniques so that you can improve your communication skills. Step number 3 is to actually observe a live lesson be taught. And this is mostly virtual. Well, definitely mostly virtual in the last year and expected to be virtual in the upcoming year. And then you actually teach your own One Health lesson. You, of course, have backup. So in case you're nervous, it's okay. You have backup of somebody who has already taught this lesson who's there to assist you. At this point, you become a certified lesson leader. But it doesn't stop there, because I did not create One Health lessons for the English-speaking world. I created One Health lessons for the world. And with that being said, you bring these lessons home. Right now, the lessons are being translated into 88 languages by hundreds of volunteers around the world. And you have the opportunity to teach 5 times in your own community, in your own first language. And at that point, you become a One Health Lessons ambassador. A One Health Lessons ambassador has certain perks. There are social events with other fellow One Health Lessons ambassadors around the world. There are book clubs. There are mentoring opportunities. There's networking opportunities. But the goal of being a One Health Lessons ambassador is really then to inspire action in others, to teach others in your community how to teach, how to improve their science communication skills. You must know the saying, learn it, do it, teach it, and then you can become an expert, right? So learn it, do it, teach it. And that's what the six-step program is about. Here's a story about Charles. He's in Nigeria, and he is one of the first One Health Lessons ambassadors. So again, he did the 4-hour training program to become a certified lesson leader. He took it upon himself to teach 5 different lessons, and then he became a One Health Lessons ambassador. It did not stop there with that title. He understood his responsibility to the community at large. And what he did was that he recruited 20 people from his school and taught those people those 4 hours of the training program, got them all to be certified lesson leaders, and they went out into classrooms. Over a course of 2 weeks, him and 20 other university students taught over 2,000 children. So here's a challenge to you. Can you do that in your own community? Can you do that in Maine? Can you do that in Michigan? Can you do that in New Jersey? Can you do that in Pakistan and Indonesia? Wherever you are on this planet, can you do that? And Charles at that point was a final year veterinary student. I have faith with everybody who is listening today. You can do this. It just takes passion and determination. And I know from personal experience that Charles is a much better communicator now than he was when he first started the program. So how can you become a volunteer lesson leader? Well, the easiest way is to email and express your interest in the Lesson Leaders program. You can also sign up through onehealthlessons.com. I want to just leave you with a few lessons from the classroom, and then I'm happy to go through questions. But take this picture, for instance. Remember, we said that the One Health concept is that interconnection between our health and the health of the environment, animals, and plants, right? We also said that the One Health approach is teamwork between people of various backgrounds, disciplines, strengths. We come together and we prevent and solve complicated health problems. This is the one picture that we put on the board of explaining what One Health is to a group of 8 to 10-year-olds. And look how it was interpreted. Ignore the spelling mistakes. This person is only learning, but you can see this person understood it is connected, even though there was a different interpretation of that original picture. This person wanted to be a little bit more artistic. And this person wanted to keep it nice and simple. But you can see every single student understood the concept of One Health. Now, say for instance, if you don't want to go into a classroom because you're too shy or any other reason your schedule won't permit it, then consider bringing some information about One Health into classrooms during Earth Day. That's April 22nd. And this is what I did back in 2016. I attended a middle school Earth Day event, and all of these materials were recyclable, and they were recycled actually too. The thing I wanted to mention is that there are some universities that have been raising awareness and creating centers on health and climate change or health and environmental changes. And I always like to share this story because I think it gets people to start thinking in a different way. So please allow me to share it with you now. In natural disasters, as I said at the very start, when I was being called up to help with the wildfires, this is really what it was looking like. It was terrible on so many levels. We were dealing with floods, wildfires, so many other things. Can you look at this photo right here on the top left? And just imagine outside of this picture, there's a farm. And if there's flooding here, that means that there's flooding on that farm. Now imagine these two people are going to be seeing you in the emergency room the next day after this photo was taken. And you don't see it here, but on their legs, they have cuts. Now, remember, there's that farm. Can you imagine what's in this water? Can you just imagine what is in this water and what these men are being exposed to? So you have these two men come into your ED, right, your emergency department, and you ask questions and you see these terrible cuts and you hear that they were just, they had to be evacuated because their homes were destroyed. But you didn't know that they were wading through this water. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't know that there was a farm up there because you didn't ask. So when you see a living organism in front of you, regardless of the species, human, animal, whatever, it's not just the organism in front of you. It's not just the animal or the person in front of you. It's that whole story behind it, right? Think about in this picture on the top right, you have somebody being discharged from the hospital, but they have nowhere to go. They don't have a home to go to. So how closely, think about your school, think about your hospital where you're working. How closely does your hospital work with, say, social workers and other type of services that not only help with mental health, but also family health as a whole? So I just want to raise this point because sure, climate change, of course, you see chronic changes to health with climate change, but also you see immediate acute changes too. So always be aware. If you are seeing something that's out of the ordinary in a patient, ask anybody else at the home sick. Do you have a pet? Is that pet sick? Do you see what I mean? Now, other things that have happened in the world in the last few years is that now we have One Health Awareness Month. That happens every January. And there's also actually International One Health Day, which is November 3rd. So it's coming up, and One Health Lessons is doing something very special the following weekend, which is a graduation ceremony for ambassadors, and it's open to the public. Everybody's allowed to come. I want to leave you with this quote. It is one of my favorite quotes. It's by Karen Nyberg, a NASA astronaut. She says, every single part of the earth reacts with every other part. It's one thing. It's one thing. So put in your chat box right now, if you can, what profession, what discipline do you think Karen Nyberg has a background in? She says every single part of the earth is related with every other part. It's one thing. So let's see in the chat box. Do you think she's a biologist? Do you think she's, somebody says an engineer, a vet? Let's have at least two other guesses. Another person says veterinarian. Astronaut. Yeah, ultimately she becomes an astronaut, right? I like that. Anybody else? A nurse, environmentalist, medical doctor? Okay, awesome. Biologist? So get this. She is actually coming from a background of being a mechanical engineer. Why would a mechanical engineer say something like this? Every single part of the earth reacts with every other part. It's one thing. Why would a mechanical engineer say that? My theory is that she looks out and she sees our planet and she sees what we depend on. And what we depend on is this very thin line. You see where this arrow on the left is pointing to, this very thin line. So regardless of where we are on this planet, we are dealing with the same very thin line. We have to work together through teamwork. We have to share our skills, share our strengths, have conversations, share our knowledge in order to protect this beautiful planet that we live on. So the future of One Health is truly global. I invite you to read my book. It's called The Art of Science Communication. It's available on Amazon. It's also available at my website, deborah-thomson.com. And I also want to bring to your attention, Andrew, if it's possible to put just in the chat box, that we are doing a survey meant for nursing students, medical students, veterinary students, and veterinary technology students, okay? And that survey is to plan for something that's very exciting in One Health lessons, and that's a One Medicine event, and actually several events. We want to do this quarterly. So what that means is that we have two clinicians. We have a human medical clinician, and we have a veterinary medical clinician. And we look at a single case. Now, I'm not going to tell you what species we're talking about, if it's Homo sapien or any other, okay? But we look at a single case. And between the veterinary world and the human medical world, at the same time, we work together to help treat this case, okay? So some of it's based on reality, some of it's based on some cases that we see from published peer-reviewed journals. But either way, you'll see that between veterinary medicine and human medicine, we're like close cousins. I say it's kind of like speaking with somebody from the UK. Sure, I have a different accent than people in the UK do, but we understand each other. Sure, besides the accent, we have different expressions, different idioms, but we understand each other. And that's the point of One Health. And One Medicine brings those two parts of One Health together so that we can really learn from each other. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll stop sharing and I'll open the floor up to questions. Thanks for participating, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Thomson. That was a really interesting and inspirational presentation. I really like the call to action to encourage participants to consider opportunities to teach in the community One Health and One Health lessons. We're now at the part of the presentation, or the webinar, I should say, where we'll take questions from the audience. So you can send them in. We have a few that have come in through the Q&A tab. You can also raise your hand and we can unmute your microphone and you can ask a question directly. But before we begin, I just want to mention a few other countries that may not have been mentioned at the beginning. So we're giving everyone the proper shout outs. We have some participants from Peru, Ethiopia, Italy, Pakistan, Nigeria, though we may have mentioned that, and a few other professions. I'm not sure if these were mentioned: microbiology, risk management, public health, fire and emergency management. So very broad list of countries and professions represented today. So thank you everyone for participating. And one last thing, I shared the link to the survey. I just want to point out it's a very short survey, if I'm not mistaken. Is it 3 questions? So
yeah, it's only 3 questions.
It will take
super short.
Very little time to complete. I know we all get invitations to participate in the surveys, and most of us don't because they're too long. This is very short. It will take very little of your time, minutes, maybe even seconds. So, so please have a look at that. So I'll start off with some questions here that we had come in through the chat or through the Q&A. So one question, this is from Dr. Bilbo Gracos, and I think it's related to the beginning of the presentation. And he was asking, he wanted to know, and he said, please let us know what section in the incident command management system you reported to upon arriving at the site. I believe this would be in reference to the wildfire in California you started the presentation with.
Yes, thank you very much. So the ICMS or the ICS, depending on where you are living, is called, so the Incident Command Management System, or the Incident Command System, for the benefit of everybody, to get everybody on the same page. Somebody who wants to help with an emergency can't just show up, right? That's going to be that's going to complicate the problem. Because there has to be a reporting structure. Okay, so there's a hierarchy, and depending on what level of emergency or natural disaster that you're dealing with, the command system could be small, longer or shorter. But ultimately what happened is that I was told, honestly, I was told to show up at this particular site where I would have my Red Cross cot, right, the night before. And I showed up at the address, and it was actually a construction site, and there was nothing there. But I did know that animals were being held at the Chico airport. So I just set my GPS to go there. And there I found somebody who was the coordinator of the entire airport. He was working there at 10 o'clock at night while everybody else was going home, or had already gone home. But that's what you do when you're a leader, right? You just keep going. And so I approached him and I said, hi, I'm here to help. I don't know where to go. I was trained through X, Y, and Z program, and just let me know what I need to do. And I also explained to him that I'm happy to do whatever is needed. If he wants to place me in the bottom rung, that's fine. If he wants to put me on the top rung, that's fine. I'm just there to be of assistance. If he needs me to clean cages, I'll do that. Just tell me what you need. And so ultimately what he told me was to be in charge of, it turned out to be 20 other volunteers each day, and taking care of 300 animals each day. And so I created the system in that cat sector of everybody rounding, doing medical rounds every 2 hours. So in case there are really bad burn victims, and if you don't know yet, in medicine, when it comes to blunt trauma, when it comes to burns, sometimes the tissue doesn't declare itself until after several hours have passed, or even a few days. You don't see how bad is bad until the tissue declares itself. So, so we round every 2 hours, me and 20 other individuals, and they tell me if there are concerning patients in our sector, and then I transfer them over to more like the ICU section of the airport, even though that sounds funny, ICU section of an airport. But who I reported to ultimately was the head of the ground control, I guess you would say, at the airport. He was the person who I reported directly to. And then for the following year, if there was going to be another emergency and I stayed in the state, then I would have had that person's position and would have been working very closely with the firefighters and going out into the field and working with them in that capacity. So that's how it works in disaster medicine. There's definitely a hierarchy, and you need to stay in that hierarchy, or else there's chaos.
Indeed. Thank you for that. Again, I want to encourage everyone from the audience, if you want to directly ask a question verbally, we have that capacity. So if you do want to ask a question directly, use the raise hand functionality within Zoom, and we can unmute your microphone. We have a question here about One Health. I think the question is trying to ask is, are there One Health programs affiliated with any universities that you're aware of?
Yeah, thank you for that. Certainly when I was in veterinary school, in retrospect, I was in one of the first One Health programs that existed in the world, but it wasn't called it back then. it was very rare to hear the term One Health outside of veterinary medicine at that time. And I felt like that was such a shame. I took a lot of undergraduate classes in ecology. And when I first heard the term One Health, when I was already in veterinary school, I was like, what? When did I learn about this 20 years before? So that's why I created One Health Lessons. But there are One Health programs around the world right now, either at the master's degree, you can even have a PhD in One Health. I have a certificate of, it's called International Veterinary Medicine. So it doesn't say One Health in the title, but like I said, in retrospect, it is that. But that's from a while ago. But I do encourage you to, if you don't have a One Health program at your school, at your medical school, or wherever you are, whatever discipline you're coming from, then I would encourage you to start a One Health club. And what that means is there's something called ISOHA, the International Student One Health Alliance. And that's a great way, if you just look it up, ISOHA, you can also look up the One Health Commission, just Google that. But you can connect with universities around the world. When it comes to universities changing their curriculum or anything like that, it takes a while. Probably it takes longer than you actually going through medical school. But if you want to participate actively in One Health and you want to get other people involved in One Health in your community, in your university, I would say join One Health Lessons, become a lesson leader and hopefully an ambassador, but then also start a One Health club at your school. And then somebody from One Health Lessons can come and present for your first meeting if you want. But a really good network is the International Student One Health Alliance. Hopefully that helps.
Great. Quick question. I noticed like if you, to be honest, I wasn't very familiar with One Health prior to this. And if you just Google One Health, you can find information from like CDC here in the United States on One Health. So are there One Health departments within government agencies that you're aware of?
Excellent question. There are people on Capitol Hill and federal government who are trying to do that. And I know that because I'm a technical advisor for those people. So it is a work in progress, let's say. The government, it has different sectors, just like everything else in life, there are different sectors. If you remember back in high school, you learned chemistry and then you learned biology and then you learned physics, right? But in the world, out in the world, everything comes together. So the government has all these different sectors, and silos, if you want to call it that. So what these incredible thinkers on the Hill are doing, they are creating a system that bridges different sectors of the government together in order to accomplish some meaningful goals and prevent some incredible disease outbreaks, such as the pandemic. I have to give special shout out. I think I saw somebody from Bangladesh. Bangladesh has a fantastic One Health program. They actually have a One Health Secretariat at the federal level, which is incredible. And India also has been making a lot of headway in the One Health space at the federal level. So there are a few countries out there that are working towards this. I would just love to see every single country working towards this. And the United Nations now has something called the Tripartite Plus. So just briefly, what that means is the WHO, the World Health Organization, in collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization. And then it's called OIE. Think of it like the World Health Organization for animals, okay? Plus the United Nations Environmental Program. So it really has those four entities. So animal, agriculture, plants, and the environment and human health all starting to talk together. And that's called Tripartite Plus. And if you Google that, you'll find it. So there's headway. And I think everybody in medical and veterinary schools right now, by the time you're out in practice, One Health is going to be much bigger than it is at this moment today. So now is the time you need to get involved in One Health.
Great. I mean, it sounds kind of some parallels with just disaster medicine. Wasn't really considered a discipline years ago, and now there's programs in it. There's certificates. You can get master's degrees in it. But usually, I think now in medical school, there's some focus in curriculum on disaster medicine. So it seems to have some parallels with that. Still an emerging science. That's one of the missions of WADM, is really to build the science, the field of disaster medicine. We do have a participant who has raised her hand, and I'm hoping she's still listening, and I'm probably going to mispronounce the name here, Penafrancia, and forgive me if I said it wrong. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute your microphone if you're still there.
Yes, I'm here.
Did I say your name correctly?
Oh, you can call me Pia.
Pia, okay. Much easier. Great. Pia, the floor is yours.
Yes, Dr. Thompson, thank you for a very informative webinar. As usual, it was fantastic. I do have a question though. How would I be able to have a productive conversation with a friend who is a staunch anti-vaxxer, right? He lives in a region where there are low vaccination rates, and he currently believes that the virus came from a Wuhan lab. How would I be able to approach him and have a productive conversation without getting very angry?
Yeah, about the getting very angry part, that's internal. So, so that part I can't help you with. I'm not a therapist, but I can give you tips on how to have that type of conversation, because it certainly is a conversation that, it's not theoretical. This is happening multiple times a day around the world. And also with the book, and I could put a link to the book as well. It also mentions how to handle such important conversations. But the trick is to listen to their reasoning first, and also be very honest. I can tell you right now, I don't know if we as in science, as in the world, will ever know the true origin of COVID. I don't know if it's even possible. Maybe in 100 years, we'll have new technology that we can figure that out. I don't honestly know if it exists right now. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but I don't know that answer. Listen to the reasons why they feel this way. Is it because of fear? Is it because, having something coming from the environment is just such a big thing that it's hard to comprehend, and it's just that much easier to think that it comes from people? Do you see what I mean? Where are they getting information? Who are the people they're speaking with? Certainly, it's not right for anybody, regardless of what their interests or priorities are, to only speak with people of the same interests and priorities. How is the world going to get ahead with that? We have to have open conversations, and we have to build trust too. So you mentioned this person's a friend. That's a very good start. What I would say is listen to them. If there's something that you think, oh, wow, I didn't think of it this way, say it out loud. Have them feel heard, instead of, oh, this person has a different agenda and I have to prove my point. Do you see what I mean? You don't want them to be defensive. You want to actually go in with an open mind and not only listen to what they're saying, but try to figure out, why are they saying it? What about their background is causing them to think this way? And then from there, once they feel heard, and here's the key, feel heard, okay? You have to make sure that they feel respected. Then they are much more open to return the favor. And once you get them to say, that's right, at least once, you know that you got an open mind. So more details are written in the book that I just put the link to in the chat box. But thank you for the question.
Thank you for your answer.
and for those listening from outside the US, well, I think globally, every country has some degree of anti-vaxxer. Vaccines have become quite politicized in the United States, probably more so than most other countries around the world. So just for some additional context there. We have a question. Actually, have a couple questions coming in. Folks with their hands raised. Let me ask you this, Dr. Thomson. We are at the top of the hour. Are you able to stay around for a few more minutes?
Yeah, if people want to keep this conversation going, I'm here for everybody. There's also something I wanted to mention is that with One Health Lessons, we are right about to launch a second set of COVID lessons, and it's focused on the vaccine. And it's not just the vaccine itself, it's the science of the vaccine, and get this, it's the woman behind the science of the vaccine. So if you want to learn about this lesson, then be a part of the Certified Lesson Leaders program. You can get more information there at onehealthlessons.com involved. And yeah, would like to have you guys as a part of the One Health Lessons community, the global community. So yeah, let's keep the conversation going if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah, sounds good to me. We have another question here from the Q&A tab about utilizing GIS, and well, I'll just read it. It's from Dr. Bograco. He says, our students in New England are utilizing geographic information systems, GIS, and developing public health poster presentations. Could you share a few thoughts on GIS in zoonotic investigations?
I think GIS is the future. I am so happy to hear that medical students are using this. Last year I was giving a talk that was associated with NASA, and I know for a fact that NASA is using spatial coordinates and looking at climate and trying to track not only the migration patterns of certain species, but also what are the risk factors that go along with, say, mosquitoes, mosquito populations going up, particularly in areas where there's malaria or dengue fever. So once NASA realizes that the prediction is that the moisture is appropriate, the temperature is appropriate, the amount of the altitude of the area is appropriate for large amounts of mosquitoes to blossom, right? To have them come about. Well, then they tell the local authorities that, okay, this is the time to empty those tires, right? Those tires that collect the water and other stagnant, getting rid of other stagnant water. So in short, GIS, I think, is a fantastic mode to improve public health because it can combine looking at risk factors and do that risk analysis at the same time as tracking if there is an increased amount of people showing up in the hospital with similar clinical signs, right? So GIS will be our friend in the future is the way I see things.
Great. We have a question from the audience here with the participant has the hand raised. So it's Surajit Das. Again, if I mispronounced your name, I apologize in advance. I'm going to go ahead and unmute your microphone. You there?
Hello.
Hello, the floor is yours.
Fine. That is a nice presentation. A very much presentation, and I am from India, working in a university as a professor. Hello, am I audible clearly?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. So my question is that I'm working in the field of the One Health concept. and I'm a researcher in the field of the antimicrobial resistance. So, in recent scenario, the public health concept has been replaced by the One Health concept, as you uh, mentioned in a well manner. So my question or discussion about that, the antimicrobial resistance can be tackled by this One Health concept in this 21st century.
Thank you very
Or
much. Yes, sorry, did you need to continue? Was there another part? Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Professor Das, for saying that. For the benefit of everybody else, if the audio was not clear, he was talking about antimicrobial resistance. So the way I explain antimicrobial resistance to somebody who has never heard the word before, and keep in mind, antimicrobial is a tongue twister. Try to say that 5 times fast. So it's really a term that scientists say. The general public, you're not going to necessarily hear them say that, but antimicrobial, what does that mean? It means, and resistance. So it just means that the bacteria, the viruses, the fungi, is things that are microbes, right? They are so small that typically you can't see. Some people also call helminths or worms considered under AMR. It's up for debate depending on who you talk to. Anyway, if you use medication that's supposed to kill those organisms or mitigate them, with antibiotics, antivirals, whatnot, and you use those medications inappropriately, either you choose the wrong one, you dose too low, you dose too high, the duration is too short or the duration is too long, then that means that the next time around there's an issue, there very well could be a problem treating that infection because the residual organism could have already been exposed. The other thing that's worth knowing about is if there's antimicrobial resistance in the area, then, and you can look this up, it's really quite fascinating, and I actually created a lesson on it that I need to post, but there could be gene transfer if the area is not addressed properly. So meaning that just because one bacteria is resistant, if it lives next to another bacteria, then they could share the same type of genes and spread it that way. So long story short, that's what antimicrobial resistance is. One Health and AMR, antimicrobial resistance. The One Health approach can certainly help mitigate the problem of AMR in so many different levels. So remember how I was talking about the bottom up approach and the top down approach? Not only do we as scientists need to make sure that the general public understands the concern of AMR and make sure that we as clinicians do not prescribe the inappropriate type or amount of drugs to our patients. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the policymakers try to fund alternatives to the current antibiotics that we have or antivirals that we have, because resistance is going to happen, right? That's nature. That's just adaptive selection, right? But it comes in 2 sections. We have to make sure that there are alternatives coming from the funding from federal government, hopefully. And then we also have to teach the general public at that level how to minimize risk of having an infection in the first place. And that comes down to sanitary measures, right? And so taking the One Health approach, who are the people who would be involved in something like that? Okay. So veterinarians, human doctors, farmers, politicians, teachers, public health specialists, epidemiologists, environmental health scientists because they have to test the shared environment. So you could see if all of those people work together, then that, and of course, biochemists and the people who are trying to figure out how to find these alternatives to the current medications. So there's a lot of people involved, and taking the One Health approach in a systematic way will certainly help speed up the fight against AMR. Hopefully that makes sense. And I'm happy to have more of a conversation on this.
Great. Looks like we have one last person from the remote audience who has hand raised. This person has been waiting very patiently. So Jawad Ula, if you're there, I'm going to unmute your microphone. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, dear and respected professor. This session was very informative. Thank you so much. And my question is about that respected told in his session that mutation is not a big fear. So how we can manage and control mutation? And second is how do we, for example, I'm working as a volunteer. So how I can convince the people that it is mutation is not a fear for us. Like if we look at the current situation of COVID-19, so there's a mutation occurring till now, successfully vaccine are not developed.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Excellent question. So just to summarize it, it sounds like how can we get people to not fear mutations, and how can we get people to really understand them? Is that really what your question is?
Yes, that is my question.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So the way I do that with the general public is that I show that mutations happen in nature. Remember that picture of the tomato that had all these different growths off of it, right? So that technically is a mutation, but besides it looking just strange, does it really change its function? Could it even be seen as a good thing because this one single plant was larger, so then it could provide more food to more people, right? So in that regard, sure, it looks strange, but it could be better. So in that regard, mutation could be a good thing. Mutation can be a hard thing because it can make viruses less predictable and harder to treat and to mitigate. So what I make sure the students understand and the general public understand is that's the whole reason for having the flu vaccine change every year. What we do in science is we track these mutations throughout the year, and we try our best to predict when and where, what type of influenza virus will be in a certain area of the world at a certain time. And then at that point, the government distributes a particular type of vaccine for our best guess of the influenza, the largest strain of influenza, and that's how we can protect the general public. And so we use that as an example for even 8-year-olds to say it's really important to track changes. We don't want to be caught off guard about these mutations. And that's why genetic sequencing is so important. And certainly some countries have been much better at it than other countries in this last year for COVID, for SARS-CoV-2. But that's the whole reason to track it, so that we can know ahead of time if we have to change these vaccines. And I personally have a feeling that given the degree of change seen with SARS-CoV-2 with the variants and such, that it will be likely that we will need to have seasonal or annual type of vaccines against COVID, just because of the sheer nature of nature. So it's about setting the right expectations for people, making them aware that nature does this, it's normal in nature, and scientists have this on their radar, and we are tracking it, and we scientists want to make sure everybody is as healthy as possible. And so that's why we are trying to predict upcoming mutations so we can cut that off before it actually happens. Hopefully that makes sense.
All right, I think we answered all the questions from the Q&A, and there are no more hands raised. There was one actually, sorry, let me go back one step. There was a participant inquiring about a PhD in One Health. I think you had mentioned that earlier in the discussion when we were kind of talking about academic programs and departments with respect to One Health. Do you know off the top of your head which institution may offer that degree?
Right. So the PhD is with University of Florida. There are several master's programs. Certainly at the UK, I know University of Edinburgh has it, and several other universities have master's programs. If you go to onehealthcommission.org, then that information is updated fairly regularly, and you can find out what schools offer what.
Great. Well, I really want to thank you for your time today. We did go over the hour, and thank you for those extra 15 minutes you provided us to answer questions. As most people know who've participated in our webinars before, all of our presenters do this as volunteers. So we really appreciate everyone's time and willingness to share their insight and expertise with people who participate in the remote audience. Just one last time, if you wanted to let the members of the audience know how they could obtain a copy of your book if they're interested.
Sure. I'll put the link here. This is the .com version, so the American version of Amazon, but I think it might switch over. Say if you're in the UK, it might go to .uk or Canada.ca. But ultimately, just look up my name on Amazon and type in the Art of Science Communication, and you got it.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you, everybody, for participating in today's webinar. I know some people that's morning, afternoon, night. We've had participants participating in the middle of the night for that matter. So we really appreciate all the support that we get from everyone to make these such worthwhile events for us. And thank you, Dr. Thomson, for your time and sharing your insights with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you to all the organizers, and thank you to all the participants. Thanks for answering the questions in the chat. And I look forward to the next time we all have together.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.